Are you a Christian single woman who feels like there's no godly men to date? Have you asked yourself, where are all the Christian men? If so, you're in the right place, because in this video, I'm going to share 6 things you can do to help you meet the right guy, even though there really are a lack of men for Christian single women. And just know, throughout this video, I've ordered this content from big picture down to very practical details. So in the first few points, it's going to be very theological. And then as we go through the 6 pointers, we'll get down to some very practical things you can do. Number 1, submit to God and put more faith in God's sovereignty, not less. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. As a Christian woman, there are more of you than there are Christian single men. And for reasons I'm not going to fully dive into in this video, that is a fact that you have to reckon with. When you walk into church, typically there are genuinely more single Christian women than there are Christian single men. And of course, it's difficult to be a Christian for everybody, and that's always been true throughout history. But at this particular time in history, it is especially difficult for boys to grow into godly men. There is an assault on masculinity right now, and that is having an effect on the amount of godly men that are available to Christian single women. So what's the solution? Despair, giving up, dating godless men and trying to convert them? Whenever Christians are faced with an issue that makes them want to lose faith and despair, the Bible calls us to have the opposite reaction. We're supposed to look at impossible situations and not have less faith in God, but rather more faith in God. There are practical things you can do, which we're going to talk about later in this video, so stick with me. But before we get to those practical things, we do need to fully submit to the theological truth that God is sovereign and He alone can do what we want. He's the one who has the power to produce those good things that we can't produce for ourselves. And while we play an active role in pursuing a good relationship, ultimately God's the one who's going to have to bring that into your life. And God has not run out of godly men for His daughters. He is sovereign enough to, despite the issues facing men these days, to provide you with a godly husband. And so you have to continue to have faith in that truth. And I'm reminded of how the disciples reacted when Jesus was talking and teaching them about salvation. They said, this just seems impossible. And in Matthew 19:26, Jesus said, with man, this is impossible. But with God, all things are possible. Likewise, as a Christian woman who's facing the very difficult challenge of finding a godly man, you might feel like this is impossible. And in your own strength, it really is. But be that faithful woman. Rather than having less faith, have more faith in the face of this challenge. And remember that with God, all things are possible. Number 2, focus more on the solutions rather than the problem. The path forward always has 2 perspectives battling for our attention. The one perspective is to overly focus on the problems, and the other perspective is to focus on the solutions. Of course, you really do need to do both to some extent. Before you can really know what the solution is, you have to rightly define the problem. But after you've identified the problem that you're facing, it becomes self-defeating to keep focusing on that problem rather than putting more emotional energy into the solutions. So you don't want to be that type of woman who's sitting around with other women complaining about men. Yes, there is a lack of godly men. Yes, there is issues right now facing you, and it's hard being single and wanting to find a man, but it just seems impossible. That's a real issue, but it doesn't help you to keep beating that drum, to keep complaining about the real issue. Rather, what you want to do is spend your emotional energy focusing on the solutions, because there are solutions. And although it's hard to find a godly man, there still are godly men out there. So you really want to avoid becoming one of those women who's training their social media algorithms to keep feeding them the echo chamber complaints of other women. The more you watch other women complaining about men, the more the algorithm's going to send you more videos like that. And life is like that too. The more you engage in this non-productive complaining about men, then the more you're going to get stuck and entrenched in that. As Philippians 2:14 through 16 instructs, do everything without grumbling or arguing, so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault in a warped and crooked generation. Then you will shine among them like stars in the sky as you hold firmly to the word of life. The sea of women out there are complaining about the lack of good men. Be one of those ladies who refuses to complain and is willing to do what she can to help solve the problems facing her. Number 3, don't use the lack of godly men as an excuse to date godless men. I was recently watching a show called My 600-Pound Life, and it's a show about obese people who are trying to lose weight. And this one woman was explaining to the doctor that she's an emotional eater, and when she's struggling with something in life, she eats. And the doctor lovingly said, well, that may be true, but regardless of why you're eating, if you keep eating this much, you're going to die. And that made sense to her. It clicked in her mind. And she really did have a bad childhood. She really did have bad relationships and hurtful things that happened to her. And she was struggling with finances. And there were all these stressful things that were triggering her to eat. But she finally came to her senses and realized, I can't use these as excuses anymore, because if I keep eating, I'm going to die. We all do this type of thing with sin. We're always looking for a reason to justify the sins that we're doing. So it may really be true that in your social circle, there's no one for you right now. There might truly be less Christian men available in your church. You may truly have had really bad experiences with online dating. It worked for other people and you did the exact same things as them, and for some reason it turned out terribly for you. All of these could be very true experiences and things that have occurred to you, real problems. But if you use these as justification to date godless men or to fall into other sins that's going to keep you out of a good relationship, it doesn't really matter why you're doing it. It's still going to hurt you. As Romans 6:1 through 4 teaches us, there's never a good reason to do the wrong thing. And on a practical level, when you get in relationships with godless men, when a godly man does come into your life, he's either not going to be interested in you because you're involved with someone else, or you're not going to be ready for it because you're still healing from the hurt that's happened because of these previous bad relationships. Number 4, make sure your view and understanding of biblical masculinity is accurate. If you don't know what a biblical man looks like, you can actually see biblical men and miss them and act like there are no biblical men. Many churches are teaching a feminized version of Christianity. They're making it seem like to be truly spiritual, to truly love God, you have to express it in these very specific ways that the church is promoting. So you have to come to Bible study, sit in a circle, and share your feelings and personal opinions about what we're talking about. You have to enjoy a certain type of music that typically is more feminine, talks about, it's like worshiping God through a love song. And men often don't want to worship in that way. And they say, well, if you're really serving or you're really loving God, you'll serve in the children's ministry, or you'll, be very emotive and expressive because you're come to this church gathering that's very social, and, that's what you do when you really love God. I'm not saying these things are bad. I'm saying these are really good things, but these are often just one expression of the way someone wants to express their love for God or their service to God. Men don't want to usually sit in a circle and talk and share. That's not something that they crave to do. They might want to just sit with one mentor and talk about the Bible. A woman may want to do a 50-page Bible study that she has homework every week to do. A lot of women like those big, thick studies. My experience is that most guys don't like those big, thick studies, and they'd rather just read the Bible and go through it, book by book. Men don't want to come together and sit in a circle and talk. They'd rather do something active rather than having to share. None of those things make someone more spiritual or less spiritual, but churches are inadvertently sending the message that to be a strong Christian, you need to express yourself in these feminine ways. I say all of that because you have to know what a godly man actually looks like to identify the godly men. Don't fall for the trap that it has to look for a certain way. Look for the spiritual fruit as described in Scripture, but just be careful that you're not taking on this feminized version of Christianity that American churches are often pushing these days. Look for guys obeying 1 Corinthians 16, verses 13 through 14. Be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong. Let all that you do be done in love. Number 5, be visible and don't use the truth that men should pursue as an excuse to hide away at home. I truly believe that men should pursue when it comes to dating and marriage and relationships. And I don't believe that a woman should be the one pursuing a man. Sadly, however, the church and just general teaching on this subject has been so heavily emphasized on men doing the pursuing, there has been a vast underservice to women in helping them understand what they should be doing. They're not supposed to be pursuing, but they're not supposed to just be sitting there waiting either. And the reason I believe that is because when you really study the scriptures on this topic, there is not a direct command to men to pursue women. A lot of you are thinking about Proverbs 18:22, but I'm going to address that in a minute. So there's not a direct command in Scripture for men to pursue women. Rather, the way we get to that principle, which I believe is biblical, is by applying marriage principles to the dating season. So for example, when you look at Ephesians 5:21 through 33, you see that a man, the husband, is supposed to be leading his wife, and the wife is supposed to be respecting and following her husband's leadership in the relationship roles. So that's where we get that standard, but that doesn't say anything about dating. So in wisdom, we take the principle of a husband leading, and we say, well, the way we would express that in the dating context is for the man to pursue. And I think that that's very valid. The reason I'm saying all that is because you can't stop there, because the Bible also talks about the role of a wife in marriage, and she's not just sitting there on the train that the husband is driving doing nothing. So if you're going to apply a marriage principle to the dating realm for husbands and men, then you have to do the same thing for women. And just as the wife is supposed to be reflecting the church and the husband Christ, in our relationship to Christ, we're not just sitting doing nothing. Yes, Christ pursues us, but we're also responding and acting and inviting his pursuit. And likewise, that's what a wife should be doing in the marriage role. Thus, we should be applying that principle to single women in the dating sphere. So when they are just sitting there doing nothing but expecting the man to do everything, that's not a good representation of what she should be doing in marriage one day. So you want a man to be able to pursue you in the dating season because that's a good sign he's going to make a good husband one day, and that represents the masculine role more. You as a woman should be thinking the same way and say, what should I be representing so that I can show that I'll be a good wife one day? Because just sitting there doing nothing does not accurately represent what a wife is called to do. So, as I said, a lot of people talk about Proverbs 18:22 as a direct command that men should be doing the pursuing. It states, "He who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord." The problem with using that verse as a direct command to men to find a wife is that you're not fully understanding what the Proverbs actually are. The Proverbs are not commands and they're not promises. They're actually principles. So for example, it says, bring up a child in the ways of the Lord and in the way he should go, and he will not depart from it. Well, there's been many Christian parents who've raised their children in the Lord who their children have departed from it. Or, for example, it says in Proverbs 5 that men should be avoiding the adulterous women. So is that really just a verse to men to avoid adulterous women, or is that not capturing a principle for all Christians, men and women, to avoid adulterous people? It could be just as relevant to say a woman should be avoiding an adulterous man. So throughout the Proverbs, there are principles that generally come true in life, and they're stated in the male most of the time. So you can't just pick and choose which one is directly to men versus which one are not relating to women, because then most of the Proverbs wouldn't be related to women because most of them are stated in the male. So this Proverbs 18:22 is not a command for men to pursue a woman. Rather, it's capturing a principle that is marriage is good and a blessing from God. It would be just as biblical to say, to capture the principle, she who finds a husband finds a good thing and favor from God. So for those reasons, I don't believe the Bible directly states men must always pursue. And the reason I'm making this an issue is because when we lock it in like it's this rigid law, you are being religious about it and making it seem like women aren't allowed to do anything. But as I stated before, yes, I am saying men should pursue. Don't miss that. I'm not saying women should pursue. But don't make it so legalistic and rigid that you then have an excuse to sit at home under the covers expecting a man to show up at your door, because that's not scriptural. You have to actually get out there, invite men to pursue you, respond positively when men pursue you, and put yourself in places where other godly Christian men are. And number 6, focus on becoming the type of woman a godly man would want to pursue. In the end, you can't control what men are going to do. All you can control is yourself. And while there truly is a shortage of godly men out there, don't forget that there still are godly men out there. So the best way to get into a relationship with a godly man is to become a godly woman that these type of men would want. Because a lot of times we end up thinking so much about searching and finding that we forget about projecting and sending the right message to attract the right type of people into our lives. So I get emails from just as many men saying, where are all the godly women? Just like I get emails from women saying, where are all the godly men? I have both genders saying the same exact thing all the time in the comments and in emails. And my answer to everyone is always the same. People who love God and are serving Jesus are out there loving God and serving Jesus. So if you want to find someone doing that, you have to be doing that yourself, because the person that you would want who is godly is going to want a godly person. And these types of people tend to find each other in life because they're going to be doing and being at the same places. So let's say you do meet a godly man that you're interested in. Now what should you do? In this video right here, I talk about 3 biblical things a Christian woman should do when she meets a man she's interested in. I'm Mark from ApplyGodsWord.com. I really hope this was helpful content. If it was, give it a thumbs up. That helps it spread to new people who also might need to hear it. Until next time, God bless.